I am Donald Pett, the Director of the Educational Community. In this video, I explain Einstein's solution to create sustainable world peace and prevent the imminent human catastrophe predicted by our most knowledgeable citizens and futurists. Learn the 3 simple steps you can use to become a force for the solution instead of remaining a cause of the problem. The Educational Community Forever Free Curriculum is available to you and anyone at www.peace.academy.
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield, and as you know, I'm the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. I am the author of the Success Principles and someone who has been studying and teaching about human development and peak performance for many, many years. I'm with Donald Pett. He's an MD psychiatrist and someone who cares deeply about peace. He's been studying, writing about, and teaching about peace for many, many years. How many years have you been doing this, Don, talking about peace?
Well, I started when I was a kid thinking I could save the world. Actually, I always thought I'd save the world, and I said, if I can only save myself, and that's what I learned. I began to learn to save myself, and then I said, no, you can't give it away unless you have it. So I've spent a lot of time, and that's when I started. But I actually got really involved when my professor at Johns Hopkins, who was the world expert on the psychological issues of war and peace, Jerome Frank, was an inspirational teacher. He was my most important mentor there. And even after I finished my training, we maintained a dialogue. And I think I agree with, he's just given me the inspiration that I have to do that's my area of contribution to the world.
Well, you've been nothing less than a strong advocate for peace. You've twisted my arm numerous times to take me deeper into understanding how important this is. And, you know, you've helped me realize how important, I teach success, and you really got me to see that success is useless if there's no world in which to have it. And so if we blow each other up and so forth, how much trouble do you really think we're in right now? I know you're an advocate of we've only got about 10 years left. Tell me about why you're so convinced we're in deep, deep trouble around peace and war.
Well, it's quite obvious. If you look that our history is a series of wars. When we write our history, it's by a series of wars. Einstein is one of our brightest minds, and when he discovered the power of the E equal MC squared formula, release the energy of the sun, he said it's only a matter of time before we're going to destroy ourselves. He realized that the way people think is that the love of power is so important, and that we're so tribal. We identify with our group and we want to compete to win. He realized that it would only be a matter of time before we proliferate these weapons and use them. So that's actually happened. He made the prediction, and now we know they're the equivalent of 70,000, the power of 70,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs ready to be released at the push of a button or mechanical error. People who are expert, the U.S. Joint Congress had authorized a study, a very high-level study. They interviewed over 250 of the world's experts who knew something about weapons of what I call weapons of ultimate destruction, because these weapons offer no second chance. Everything in the past is, we kill people a few at a time with bombs or sticks and stones and arrows. But these are weapons that if we release 70,000 bombs, it's the end of civilization as we know it. So the study that was done by these high-level people that interviewed 250 experts, they said we're losing the battle, and it's only a matter of time. They had predicted within years we're going to have the use of these weapons of mass destruction again. So we have what you call, I've seen in your book, yellow alerts, that we're given signals ahead of time. It takes common sense. Look what's happening in the world today. We're seeing people having 60 or 70 wars at one time. The North Koreans are already saying that we're their enemy, and they're preparing a bomb. And in the paper today, it said they're also now testing a submarine so that will release missiles. And if they have the bomb and they have a submarine and missiles, a submarine off our shores means that they can, or anybody else, as a matter of fact, in 10 minutes, the war will start and it'll be over. I mean, we won't even know about it, because what happens with these weapons is as was described in the Hiroshima situation. There was a flash of light. People were going around doing whatever they do, and then they were no more. The heat was so hot, they just disappeared. They were dust. If we can just imagine those kind of things happening to the people we love, you know, our sons, our daughters, the people that are important to us. So it's quite obvious we're getting all those alerts, and we're not doing anything about it. So that's the problem. So we know we're in big trouble. Well, let me put it another way. We don't know we're in big trouble. Most people refuse to be aware of that we're asleep. We just have the idea that somebody else is going to take care of it. I've interviewed over 200 people and asked them what they do for world peace. And what they say is, I wish to pray for world peace, but I don't do anything because I don't know what I can do. No one has really come up with an idea. What do you do? I mean, I've been studying this for a long time, and the idea is, can we come up with a plan, something that would really make sense, that could be achieved in a relatively short period of time? If we only have at most 10 years, and somebody could push the button anytime, or we could have a mechanical error anytime. One rocket goes up, and whoever feels they're being attacked, it's their obligation to release their weapons immediately. They only have about 2 minutes to make a decision whether this is a real attack or not. And we've already had incidents where the bombs have been loaded, they've been up in the plane, and it was only within minutes away that it could have been all over. It's been that close. Most people aren't aware of these things. I just saw a television documentary last night of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where a Russian submarine, you probably know the story, the captain had nuclear torpedoes. And the captain said, we're going to release them, because he didn't get any signals. He thought they were at war. And it was only because of another person on the ship who contradicted him and got basically kind of mutinized the crew. They say that one person saved the world at that time. If that one bomb could have pretty much wiped out the American fleet. Much of the American fleet was surrounding Cuba, blockading them from Russia bringing in nuclear weapons to Cuba. So we're so close. We've got these yellow alerts, but no one that I know has a sensible plan, and that's what we've got. We've got to come up with a sensible plan that can make a difference, and we've got to do it in a short time. There are lots of things we could do, but if it takes 50 years or 100 years through simply acts of kindness or trying to be nice to third world countries, it's not going to get it for us if we only have short time to make our change.
So you've given us a sense of the urgency, but from your point of view, you've studied this in depth. What can we do?
Well, the only sensible plan I know is what Einstein told us when he created this powerful weapon that changed everything. As he said, everything is different now with this weapon, because now we have a weapon where it's not like you prune the bush. You get rid of some of the dead wood, and the bush comes back in a more powerful way the next season. These are weapons that kill the whole bush instantly. These are weapons that are more dangerous than cancer, AIDS, or the plague. There is no time period. And he said, there's only one way we can change things. We have to teach people a newer way of thinking. And as long as we keep thinking that the answer is the love of power, more bombs, more weapons, and essentially I think he was saying we've got to teach ourselves a higher level of spirituality. We have to learn to love ourselves and love other people. And we can do that very rapidly. So what I've been working on is how can we do that very rapidly, and I've created a program. That's the most rapid way that people can change, and then we've got to follow that up with something more substantial.
Well, talk about that program you've created.
Okay, good. Thank you for the invitation, because I love to talk about the fastest way. I think we have the fastest, most effective, and enjoyable way that we can teach these skills that we need to do, and we can do it in a way that meets every criteria that we need to succeed. We can change the way we think. There's a little saying that change your words, or change our words, will change our world. Words are symbols. They signal emotional response, whether it's cancer or love of our country or whatever. Words are tied up with emotion. And if we find the right words, we can change our way of thinking faster than anything else. So in response to Einstein's directive to us that we have to teach ourselves a newer way of thinking, as a psychiatrist, I've had the opportunity to listen to people, thousands of people over my career, and I've tried to learn. And what I've learned is there are 7 simple word changes and 2 love creation skills, 2 secret love creation skills that we can teach very rapidly. Once we teach these skills, it wakes people up. And we've got to do something to wake people up. And in order to do it, we've got to give them something that gives them quick response, that gives them immediate satisfaction so that they want to continue and come back. And that then they're willing to pass it on to other people. If it's simple, and they can pass it on to other people with a click of the computer, and you know how that multiplies. If one person sends it to 3 people, and those 3 people send it to 3 people, we could get 100 people. 100 can lead to 1,000, and we can build very rapidly. So that's the way we can do something in a very short period of time. If we can wake people up, that's the first job, because most people are still asleep, and when you talk to them about world peace, they say, "Oh, it's beyond me. It's too complicated. I've got to think about other things. You know, I've got to feed my kids," and they don't think about the long-term consequences that if we don't have a world to live in, or else they have what my professor Jerome Frank said was a hopeless, helpless response. If you believe there's nothing you can do about something, then you give up on it. As the people I've interviewed, they said, "I don't think I can do anything. But if somebody told me what made sense, I would like to take some action." But you've got to give something that makes sense. And what I call the 7+2 formula will do that. And it's these 7 simple words that we start with, and I'll share them if I can go ahead with them, if that's okay with you.
That would have been my next question.
Okay. The first word is, when we substitute, these are simple, what I call word switches. We don't have that word in our language, so we have to invent new words to talk about the process. But we have trigger words that trigger a response of something that has worked in the past. But a word switch, you see, is a word that uses new knowledge for out-of-the-box solutions. It's a newer way of doing something, because when we keep doing things the way we've done before, as Einstein told us, that's insanity. When you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So the first word is, I can. I think I can. Most people give up easily. They say, I can't. Why bother? Who cares? It's too hard. To hell with it, or fork it. These are the common words that people say that are give up words. Once you say those words, you shut down your energy factor. You're finished. You go on thinking about something else. What's on the television? What can I do to find a better bargain at the store? But when you say, I think I can, when it's a difficult problem, that's when you begin to turn on your energy. So the I think I can is a word that turns on our energy. You remember the story of one of my favorite stories, The Little Engine That Could?
Right.
You know, the little engine, they needed the toys taken over the hill. It was a big task. The little engine never done it. They asked all the big engines, and they said they were too proud and too busy. So the little engine said, I think I can, and before you know it, he was able to achieve this horrendous task. So the first step is we got to turn on our energy. The second is we say, I allow, instead of they make me. I allow is a wonderful word. It says, I'm taking responsibility for myself, instead of the blaming words that we so often get. You make me, he, she, they, or it. These are automatically the first things that kids do when they don't get their way. They start blaming others, and then we teach them to blame themselves. So that's the way we introduce guilt into the world. I don't think animals show much guilt. We're pretty good. We're good educators. We teach people to blame themselves as a way of controlling them rather than just blaming others. So the second word is I allow, instead of he, she, they, or it make me. The next word is I could, instead of I should. I could is a word that invites our higher brain to consider alternatives. It gets us to think. Call it meditate. You use the word meditate. I call it thinking. When you say I could, it says, what are the alternatives? We have this marvelous brain now. It's relatively new brain, a cortex that I call our genie organ, because it's so magical to solve problems, that when we say I could, it invites our brain. As soon as you say I should, we get this, pointing the finger. This is what we learned as kids. This is what you should do. And so we're all getting all these shoulds from the time we're growing up. As a child, of course we get shoulds. You shouldn't. You should listen to your parents. You shouldn't. You shouldn't. You shouldn't. You shouldn't blow your nose on the curtain. You shouldn't touch the hot stove. You shouldn't walk in the street. So we all grow up because as a child we don't have the ability, and it's reasonable that we get all these shoulds. But as we grow up, then we get stuck in this. What a well-known therapist, Albert Ellis, said, it, people spend most of the time shooting on themselves. And as long as they keep doing that, we cause our problems. So I could is another word, is the third word. The fourth word is when you substitute both and for either or. Either or is the way the animal brain thinks. It's the way animals can only deal with a limited amount of information. So it's usually my way or the other way. It's my tribe is the right way. I identify, they say birds of the feather flock together. And for most species, they identify with their own group, and everybody else is subject to food or fodder or whatever for their own purposes. So we are all born with this either or way of thinking. And of course, that's what Einstein recognized when he said we have to change our way of thinking. For over 1 billion years, we've been thinking in terms of either or. And that divides, either or divides the world into two categories. That's why we have all this win-lose competition, why our whole world is, our judicial department is you're guilty or you're innocent, you're right or you're wrong. We divide this world into two ways, but when we say both and, we realize it's what's good for you and me, for my tribe and your tribe. It takes us to the higher level of spiritual existence. Love is, unconditional love is when you have unconditional love for the system. Our world is getting to be an integrated place now. We're one world. But when the world was tribal for the last 1 billion years, and it was appropriate to think of what's good for me is good for my tribe, because there was limited resources between two hills. We had to be more powerful than the other. But we didn't have enough knowledge to solve problems by common sense. So we had to build the love of power rather than the power of love. So that's either or we get rid of and we put in both and. Very simple. The fifth word change is actually a sentence. The sentence, if we could change this one sentence and nothing else, we could change the world instantly. If we could just change the sentence from what works for me and my family and my tribe for here and now. See, that's the animal way of thinking. What works for me and my tribe for here and now, because the animal doesn't think down the road. If we could just add the word, a different sentence, what works for me and you, for my tribe and your tribe, for now and later, for the present time and the future. You see, there's no one to be blamed in that sentence. It's simply a sentence that says, how can we cooperate and work together? Very different than the other sentence, which says, who can win, who can be on top? Now, the sixth and the seventh word changes. We'll get rid of the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response is so powerful that we do it automatically. We call it road rage when people get upset. It's a very hard instinct to control. When somebody's frustrated, the first thing they want to do is strike out. It's an automatic response. We're born with it. And it had to be necessary for our ancestors because they were constantly being confronted with danger, life-threatening danger. So when we take the word energy, because you know what happens when we get frustrated, we secrete chemicals and we become alert. We call it the red alert response. We get ready to take action. And what most people do in an animal language is we say we have to run or fight. So the automatic response we have is fighting or running. In today's world, fighting doesn't get us what we want, and running doesn't get us what we want. We have such communication. We learn to find other people anyway. So instead, we have to recognize when we release sugar to the brain and we become more alert. It's an alerting response. If we call it energy instead of fighting or fighting, instead of anger, instead of fear and anxiety, that leads to all kinds of problems, phobia, wanting to strike out, and so on. So energy is a word that tells us this is something we need to solve a problem. energy is such a different word than anxiety. And that's another way of interpreting the very same thing that happens. We're getting more alert. And then the last word change is when we substitute urgency for emergency. Emergency was an appropriate word for our ancestors. But in today's world, we rarely have emergencies. We have situations that are urgent, but when we go out on the street and go to work or wherever we're going, we don't expect to get killed on the street or a wild animal will attack us. We expect that we have some stress, and the best way to solve it is by thinking it over, taking time, talking with other people. We solve it step by step. So when we say urgency, and then we say, is it high, medium, or low urgency? Generally, we'll find that most everything we're dealing with is of low urgency. There's nothing that really we have to deal with in an emergency situation. But if we think in terms of emergency, then we're going to react that way. Our tendency is to want to strike out immediately. It's almost automatically that, you know, a mosquito comes on our arm, we want to go ahead and slap it. How many times, you can ask this of yourself, but I've asked this of many people, how many times have you said something that you regretted saying to somebody that you care for? How many times have you did something with regard to money that was on an instant response, something that you really should have thought out? And how many times have you maybe, for a parent, slapped the kid in a way that you felt sorry for later, that you really realized there was a better way of dealing with? But you see, that's instinctive, that's within us. So these 7 words you can teach in 10 or 15 minutes. You forget all the narration I've given, and they're powerful. They change things. They change the way we think. And unless we change the way we think, then we're going to continue to do what we've done. We'll use those trigger words. A trigger word sets off what worked in the past. Again, a word that is a word switch. Gets rid of the trigger word. The best example I can think of is, and let me share with you a fantasy that I have. I have this fantasy that my family, the people that I love, and humanity, if you want to look at it this way, are stuck on a train track. And the train is coming. I can hear it. I can hear it coming. The sound is getting louder and louder. I'm not avoiding it. I mean, I really think this is a situation that my kids are in real danger. And I think, what can we do about this? And then I say, gee, if there's a switch on the train track that turns the train in another direction to a different destination that I would prefer to see it, all we have to do is one switch, one physical switch, and we get the train to go in a different direction. That's what a word switch is. Our words can get us to change the way we think to a different direction, from hate to love, from problem solving to problem solving instead of confrontation. And there are a number of word switches. You call these sort of your success principles. These are the principles. Just one principle gets you to change it. If you have 5 principles, you're more likely to be more successful than if you have 1 principle. If you have 60, or in your system you have, I believe, 67? 67, right? So if they learn 67, they're much better off than if they learn 1. So the idea is that these are the most powerful and the quickest, easiest way we can teach people a newer way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not going to last forever, though, because if we're habitually trained, and for years we've been using these other words, we've got to find something more to make them sustainable. But that's the way we wake people up. And there's the 2 other skills, but you were going to say something. I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, I just wanted to respond to your 5th and 6th and 7th principles and give you a little optimism. I heard Bill Clinton speak once, and he said, what's the difference between you and George Bush? And he said, we start with different assumptions. He said, I start with the assumption there's enough of everything. We just have to distribute it correctly. And George Bush, his assumption was there's not enough, and my job is to make sure that my tribe gets their share. So he said, if you start with those different assumptions, it creates a whole different sense of how you govern and how you run the country. And I thought, so Bill was clearly stepping ahead there. And then you talked about fight or flight. I was in the store yesterday buying running shoes, and after we tried them on, guy said, okay, you got to go over in line and wait. And I go with the line. It was a long, long line. One of their cash registers was broken. And my first response was, screw it, I'll just leave here. I don't want to wait. So that's the flight response. The guy in front of me was getting angrier and angrier. You could see he was about to scream, what the hell, why aren't you going to have a... And then I remembered The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And when he said, when he got to the end of the line, the woman said, thank you for waiting. He said, I wasn't waiting. She said, well, what you were, I saw you were back there. He said, no, waiting would imply that being up here was better than being back there. I was in the present moment the whole time, waiting. And so I remember that, and I said that to myself, and I just started breathing and going into a mindful state and being present. So literally that change of thought actually made it so I could be calm in that moment. And the last thing I was thinking is we used to only have emergency rooms when you had an accident. Mm-hmm. Urgent care centers. So if it's not an emergency, you go to an urgent care center. I remember I cut my hand last year. And I didn't want to go to the emergency room because that's where people come when they've been in car accidents and they're almost dead. So I went to an urgent care center, and I actually let two people go in front of me because they seemed like their needs were more urgent than mine. So I think there's a little creeping awareness is creeping into the culture along some of these lines here, just to let you know there's more work to do. But I think, at least in my awareness, there's some changes happening. Now you have the 2. Let's talk about the 7 plus 2. What's the 2?
Well, we need to teach people to love themselves with the abundance that overflows. I think the most important rule we have is the golden rule. Mm-hmm. And we don't really teach the golden rule very well. We preach it. We say you ought to love other people. Where do you go to get a course to, I say, I want to learn to love myself more. Mm-hmm. You can get a course in flying an airplane, you can get a course in learning to sew better, whatever. But where do you go? Where can I take a course in learning to love myself better? And so we need to have, there are 2 secret skills that I've discovered from my years of working with people. And the first skill I call emotional self-endorsement. Emotional self-endorsement. We don't do that. You see, we don't. We tell people when they're young and growing up that if you say nice things about yourself, you're being egotistical and self-centered. And one of my patients, I've seen this many times with patients, but one of my patients told me his story. He said he was telling a friend of his how proud he was of a computer work system, a program that he worked out. And his mom called him over and pulled him over, and he says, John, you should never say things nice about yourself to other people. If you're bragging, you're being self-centered, egotistical. Love only counts when it comes from other people. And you see, that's the way we're brought up. We're brought up, and when we're kids, that's true. We can't provide for love for ourselves. We depend on our parents. Hopefully we have parents who love us, and we learn something about love. But a lot of kids don't have that when they grow up. So they learn hate, they learn other things. But the point is, and this is one of your points, we can take responsibility for ourselves. But in order to do that, we have to go against what society tells us. We have to, the good news is that we know how to emotionally endorse. But we do it to other people. We've been taught when you go to an athletic event how to jump up and scream and yell. We've seen that all the time. Just watch anyone at a baseball game or football game. Emotionally endorse. When you go to a great musical event, we know how to get a baby to smile. You don't just say, smile, baby. You do it with a lot of emotions. And when you know how to, most people know how to get that dog to shake its behind and wag its tail. You talk about it in a certain way. But how often do you see people emotionally saying, wow, I am such a hot sketch, I love me. When you talk about the mirror exercise that I know you believe in, when we look in the mirror, most people look in the mirror and they say negative things about themselves. But we would really ought to be teaching people regularly to say, what are the positive things I know about me? Can I pick myself up? It's my responsibility to give myself endorsements throughout the day. One person I was working with said, if I depended on other people, I was counting the endorsements I got from other people. The whole day I got 2. He said, I continue to be depressed if I was waiting for the world to endorse me. But this person, and as she did, she said, I started to say nice things about myself, and I started to do them 10 times. I'd find 10 times when I was brushing my teeth, when I would sit down for dinner before I do that. And then I realized as I kept doing more and more, when I got up to about 30, I started feeling good all the time. It worked, So That's one of the most powerful love creation skills. Love yourself with emotion. We have to teach people to do that instead of most people. When I've spoken with people in my practice, they think, oh, I feel uncomfortable at doing that. It's uncomfortable for me to say, I can say I'm nice, I did something nice, but then they go right on to the next worry thing.
Right.
So it doesn't last very long. I mean, they say it in an intellectual way, and we know that emotion is far more powerful than the intellect. What you know isn't as powerful as what you do and when you have emotion. So that is the most powerful self-endorsement skill, self-love creation skill. It's easy to do. It's up to us to take responsibility to do it, but our society tells us it's wrong. And of course, if you want to be a member of society, you don't want to be egotistical and self-centered by saying nice things about yourself. Now, the second love creation skill is also a very, very powerful skill. It's what I call the reasonable best measure of self-worth. Instead of saying I should be perfect, most people say I'm okay if the world says I'm okay. So if people say I'm attractive, or I get a raise, so my boss gives me a raise, or my kids are doing well, or in some cases it might be if I'm driving the right car, people will think something of me, or I have the right title, and so on. So we depend on these symbols that other people say that I'm okay, instead of saying when I do my reasonable best, I deserve to emotionally endorse myself. So number 2 skill, then you go back to number 1 skill. When you do your reasonable best, which is 100% in our control. When I was giving my talk at the Central Connecticut State University Peace Program, I said, I want to give you an example. Some people, when they have climbing the ropes in school, you're in the gym, they had this exercise, you got to climb up to the top of the rope. Some people are like athletes, they go right up to the top. And other people, for whatever reason, not strong, they're too heavy, whatever, they try hard, but they can't get up to the top. And the fact that somebody has done what they reasonably could and say, I really tried, I did what I could, maybe I could learn to do better, but I endorse myself for doing what I reasonably could instead of saying, I'm only worth it all if I got to the top. And it was interesting because after the lecture, the professor there says, boy, he says, you really hit the nail. When I was a kid, he said, I couldn't climb the rope. And he said, I really felt bad about myself for such a long time because I thought I should be able to climb the top of the rope. So the reasonable best test is an input measure, and we can always control that. And what do we do when we find we're not doing our reasonable best? Then we can simply, when I recognize I'm not doing my reasonable best, now I know I can do something different. If I recognize it, I can pat myself on the back because I've done something really great. I've admitted and acknowledged maybe I could be doing better. Maybe I could study a little bit more. Maybe I could practice my musical instrument more, whatever it is. So we have a win-win situation throughout, where most people are caught up in this win-lose situation. We depend on whether the stock market goes. How many people depend on whether the stock market goes up or down, or whether the weather is good? People say, I really feel miserable because it's raining out. So we get caught up in these kinds of things. So those are the 7+2 formula. They're so easy to teach, and with 30 days of practice, we can make them automatic and effortless. And then the nice thing about this is that once you learn them, and they're all written out, it's so easy to do. I click on your computer, you can give them to someone else. You send them to your family, your friends, your loved ones. And then when they call you and say, thank you, it worked for me too, then it goes to the next person. So we can start a domino effect that can spread very rapidly. That's what we need, to have a system that teaches people something very quickly to large numbers of people.
Mm-hmm. I like this idea of 30 days because that's usually what it takes to change the thought about yourself. And I think if people were to just make a checklist, every day, did you do your 30 self-endorsements or whatever it might be, so that you have something to hold yourself accountable to, because a lot of people forget if it's not part of their normal thing. So Don, talk about why the self-love is so critical to world peace. Make that connection for us.
Okay, well, there's a saying, it's hard to give away what you don't own. So until you take responsibility to generate love for yourself, we all know the versions of the golden rule: love your neighbor as yourself, and do unto others and so on. But the modern version of the golden rule is love yourself with the abundance that overflows to enrich the world. Love is a quantity. When we fill our world with love, the world will get along a lot better. If we instead fill our world with hate, what are we going to expect? We're going to have people confronting one another, and we're going to have people having very difficult in their relationships. That's why we have so many divorces, why we have countries that are always at war, and so on, because we have not yet taught people to love themselves with the abundance that overflows. So now I'm going to give you an explanation that is something that I think I've discovered that has to do with evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Because you asked for an understanding. You know, when we all know that when we're born, we have genetic traits. We have instinct that has been pre-wired in our system. It's learned by trial and error over 1 billion years that we have wired the animal brain that we inherit. The animal brain is a very complex organism with billions of cells. And when we're born, we have certain automatic reflexes. And so we know that we've already had an education, so to speak, and it's an indoctrination rather than education. We're not learning how to think with what we inherit, but we know that we inherit a lot of information. What we haven't discovered yet is that first cell that was created, so-called, we understand 3.5 billion years, it also had certain predisposed intentions. We recognize that it was designed to multiply. It was designed to become more sophisticated. It has gone in 3.5 billion years from one cell to we are 50 trillion cells. We are composed of organs, and organs that work together. So we understand that understanding only came about 150 years ago with Darwin, you understand. For a long time, we've had other assumptions we made. But we're just learning, and we've rejected that idea. But here's the thing that people don't realize. That first cell also was designed to direct its energy to the next highest level of complexity. So when the cell was one cell, and it's split by mitosis to create its identical individual, egotistical or self-centered love was perfectly appropriate. It's like the story of Narcissus. Remember, he looked in the water and saw himself and fell in love with himself. Right. So narcissistic love was the first kind of love. Then when we became more sophisticated, that cell began to multiply and differentiate. Then we needed to have filial love, a new kind of love, a parental kind of love, where you contribute something to that larger system. And then when there are other groups of these cells, other organs or other species, we had to compete with those species for limited resources. So then we had to have tribal love. We developed a new kind of love. And then somewhere along in our long evolutionary history, the bisexual organism that was both male and female divided, and we had a male species and a female species. And they were each designed to be more efficient in what they do. The male species is full of muscles. He creates 20 million sperm a day. The female is designed to be nurturing. It's a totally different body shape. She makes 1 egg a month. So now we have erotic love. We have another kind of love. And then finally, we're getting to the next highest form of love, which is we call agape love or universal love, unconditional love, which we need when our individual tribes come together. So there is a principle that people don't often recognize. It's really a word changer. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. That's a real tongue twister. All it means is that when we develop, we go through a series. We repeat the simple series and we go to the more complex. And we start as a cell, and then we go through loving ourselves, and then we finally, in the course of our maturity, we go up to the highest level. So that first cell, you see, was already designed to direct its energy to love the higher form, to contribute to that higher system. All that is, we call that love in our society, but we have these different kinds of love which we don't recognize. So now in the course of evolution, you see, I think we have reached a point where we have, for the last billion years, engaged in tribal love, where we, as you mentioned, you know, how can I get the money for my family and my tribe, rather than we have to educate people to satisfy everyone. Now it's up to us to educate people to go to the next level of unconditional love. So I think it's built into us from the very first cell that we were designed, that one principle, and most people don't recognize this. People have been looking for an explanation. Can we prove or find something in evolution or history that says, yes, we were meant to be loving? Well, we were meant to be loving, but first egotistical and then tribal and so on. Now we've gotten to the point where we have this brand new brain. It's only a couple million years old. It's actually, the human brain supposedly is only about 150,000 years old compared to 3.5 billion. So we're getting this new brain that can do something different. We can teach ourselves and take responsibility for ourselves. And so I try to explain it because I know you're interested in love, and this is a very important point that we have innate.
Now, here we are at this evolutionary jump, if you will, but we need to move from tribal love to agape love to unconditional love of all mankind, let's say. How do we make that jump?
Well, I think we have the technology. And the good news, what Einstein told us, is that we are tribal. That is, our way of thinking has become insane. The fact that we have a weapon now that does not allow a second chance. It doesn't allow us to learn by trial and error anymore. He said the way we've been thinking is suddenly insane, and we don't know it. We're not aware of it. So we've got to teach ourselves a newer way of thinking. Well, these 7 word changes and the 2 love recreation skills are the fastest way we can teach people, because words, as I said at the beginning, I think, change our words, change our world. Margaret Mead years ago gave a talk to health workers, and she said, you know, we create our own problems ourselves because of the limited words in our language. We have a young language, and our words are all tribal. Think about it. You know, we have religious words that say that our religion is the right way and the others are wrong. We have patriotic words. Every country has a flag, and you said you're supposed to be allegiant to your flag, which means the other countries are not. And then we're taught a political symbol. So we're given symbols that are tribal, and that's what our language. We don't have a single word in our language that teaches us to look at the world as a universal citizen. We have the peace sign, but it doesn't have the emphasis of the other. So what Margaret Mead said, we have to invent new words, and that's what we need to do as well. So, for example, when I've invented the word switch and the word a trigger word. A trigger word is the word that calls forth all the old ways of doing things. A word switch is a word that takes us to out of the box thinking. It's to meditating. It's to creative thinking. Well, we've got to have words. There's lots of words that we can invent, and I've created I have a glossary of words, almost 100 words. For example, we have the word setback. We know the word setback. We don't have a word set forward. We have the negative word. We have the word put down, but is there a pull up? You don't hear the word pull up very much. We have the word worry. Worry is anticipating the worst thing that can happen. When you get on the airplane, it's going to crash. Oh my God. What's the opposite of a single word worry? I don't think we have a good word. The closest word I've found is optimism. How many times have you heard somebody say, boy, I went to sleep last night and I spent the night optimizing? You hear lots of people say, I've been worrying a lot. Yeah, I can keep worrying at night. It keeps me awake. But you see, these are words we don't have. So we have to invent symbols that change things. There's so many areas in this area, but we don't realize how tribal we are. That's what Einstein was trying to tell us. Not only are we tribal, but the problem is we don't realize it. We've got to wake ourselves up to this. Our judicial system is tribal. You have to plead innocent or guilty. There's only either or, one way or the other. Our athletics are tribal. There's a winner and a loser. The winners are miserable or happy. The others are miserable. Our entertainment is tribal. It's always a good guy who conquered. First of all, there's an evil, a devil or whatever, who gets the upper hand, but then at the last minute there's some magical event and it all works out and there's a happy ending. Our entertainment is tribal. we don't realize how tribal we are. Our money is, we want to get all the money so our tribe can be advanced. Money is a wonderful thing if we use it to distribute our energy so that we all get our share. But if some people want it all for themselves, so that's part of the idea at any rate. We've got to realize there's a change that we can make, and we start off by giving something that gives them an immediate response, a 7+2 response. And then one of the things I learned, Jack, when I was at the Federal Narcotics Hospital, I was assigned there 2 years. We had close to 2,000 inmates, and I started a program there, and that people called the educational community. It was a separate building, and I learned the power of the group process. That when people get together, and they have the intention that this whole process is for us to learn from one another. So we invented what now I call the Genie Group. It's for beginners. You have what you call a mastermind group in your program. That's for masterminds. But there aren't many masterminds. There are lots of people who just need the basic skills. So we had a wonderful result there. I got a special building there. We had 30 people living in that building, just random that we invited into the building. One of my jobs as a psychiatrist at the narcotics hospital was go to the hole, and I had to make a decision between the inmates and the security people when somebody was involved in a homosexual attack or a knife or some weapon or whatever, and that was a frequent occurrence. I would have to go and make a disposition and had to do something that satisfied both parties, because if somebody felt it wasn't fair justice. But in the 2 years that I was there, not one person in our group it had to be in the hole. We had no disciplinary reaction, because we got the emphasis that you're here to talk about things when there's a problem. You come to the group meeting and you bring it up, and we can discuss it all together and see what's the best way to handle it. So this was a different kind of process that we need to introduce. The Genie Group can be introduced very easily, anywhere, anytime. It doesn't cost anything. The best example of this is Alcoholics Anonymous, where people go and they learn from one another. The Alcoholics Anonymous has 12 steps. You have 67. We need something like that has more than 12 steps. That's why I think, your success principles, you are the leading edge of the curriculum that could be part of this process of realizing we have to start a movement of Genie groups throughout the whole world, actually. How did AA started with 2 people, remember, who said we're going to do some drunks.
So talk about what happens in a Genie group.
Well, what happens in a Genie group is someone introduces a principle. Let's say they introduce one of your principles. They talk about E plus R equals O. That it says that the way we respond to something is really critical. And they may give a couple of examples that you've already written out in your book. You have the example. And now they say, all right, this is the idea. Now people start sharing what their experience is with that. Can they relate to that? Does it have any meaning to them? And they do it. Now it becomes emotional. They have an investment in it because they see how it relates to something they're doing. And they begin to get some, gee, I see I can get some benefit out of this. They feel good about it. They begin to learn from one another. They feel good about this group. That's what happened in our educational community group. They began, people that were blacks who hated whites and were there because they were attacking white people, and the reverse. People who didn't get along together. In this kind of environment, all of a sudden people are coming together for a common purpose, to learn how to understand their behavior more. Mm-hmm. So the Genie group is a group that basically starts with principles. I call them strands, which was the word that these mental health group invented when Margaret Mead told them that we don't have a good word in our language. So I invented the word strand, which means any exercise or word or experience that makes your thinking stronger, that gives you mental strength, just like a muscle fiber makes your muscle fiber. If you have more muscle fibers, you have more muscle strength. So if you begin to collect strands, you become gradually what I call a mental wealth millionaire. You collect enough strands and you become a millionaire. Similarly, if you collect enough in your word, your language would be success principles. You collect these success principles, and before you know it, you're getting along better. You're more successful, no matter what you want to do, because they work. You know, as I've heard you say, you've studied the basic principles, and you know they work. Whether you want to become a better street cleaner, you want to become a scientist, you want to become the best car racer, or whatever. One of my favorite stories is Jonathan Livingston Seagull. You remember that? You know the story?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So it's a story about an unusual event. Somebody said, I'm not satisfied with just going to get fish every day and so on. I'm going to try to achieve a higher level. I'm capable of something more. Well, the seagull really maybe not isn't so capable, but it gave us an idea. He gave us the message. We are capable of flying higher. We're capable of creating all sorts of new things. Instead, we spend our energy with destructive kinds of things. So I hope that kind of gives you some idea.
No, I like it. I like this idea of strands. It's like mental muscle fibers. This is good. The more we have, the stronger our thinking becomes. This is
And
great.
your success principles. Every success principle they learn gives them a stronger way of dealing with the world. So a genie group then is where people meet and they're introduced to these principles lifelong. We should have education lifelong, not just 12 years. It's not until the brain is about 18 or 20 that it's beginning able to be developed and it has language and it can take responsibility for itself. Do you know most of the adult studies say we're not really ready to take responsibility for ourselves until our late 20s or early 30s. But the fact is, you know, our brain is not even fully mature until we're about 18. So that's the best time we have to learn. But at that time, education stops most people. A genie group is the kind of thing that that everyone ought to be in a genie group, and instead of, you know, until they can know enough that they can go up to the next level, which would be a mastermind group. You know, I've been in many mastermind groups, and I find that, you know, if the people don't have a mastermind, you're not going to learn very much. If you bring together people who are already advanced, you learn from each other. But if you bring people together and say, you're calling this a mastermind group, now think and come up with something, when you haven't first fed them the important principles. So the genie group is at a lower level. It's where, and you don't need a formal leader. The people in the group can become the leader. And some of the nice things that can be available in the prisons, it can be available anywhere. And we've already demonstrated to be effective in several programs that I've run.
So do you have a manual for how to run a genie group?
I have some. I've got a couple books in process to be done, and yes, it does describe how to run a genie group. There's an individual who's been doing something similar to this for about 20 years, and he's developed some basic principles for this kind of a group, and he's agreed to be available as a consultant. So that would be and I'll include that as well. But it's a very simple process to learn to be. Anybody can be. All you have to do is find something that is a good principle, and you set the group off with that, and you can take turns doing that.
I very much want to encourage you to get that out there in the world, because I think you're absolutely right. And I'm watching my own sons, who are 26 now, just beginning to be mature and independent, and, you know, their lives are coming together for the first time in so many beautiful ways. So I think you're correct about the fact that we often end our educations prematurely. We need to learn these principles that are not being taught in schools. And the idea of circles and peer groups, and whether it's AA or circle talks, or there's a lot of different things that people have come up with. But I think that's really good. I think people just need to know what the principles are, you know, just basic things that they can learn, whether it's from my book or your book or from this other person you're mentioning. But I think that's, you know, people, again, they need to be guided up until they get to the point where they can be independent. I remember I put together a curriculum guide for teachers, had 101 activities that they could use. And a lot of people weren't using them. I said, why not? Well, we don't know what order to do them in. You know, tell us what order to do them in. So, like, do this on day 1, do this on day 2, do this on day 3. Unfortunately, still a lot of people need that guidance. But I think what you're on here is something very, very powerful. We're beginning to move toward the end of our time here. What else would you like to say so that this gets out? I definitely want you to tell people how to get in touch with you and what your website is and all that. But any other major messages you'd like to share with people?
Yeah, I've identified actually 10 principles that we need to learn,
Hmm.
and uh, and one of them, we need a new vocabulary. So we've got to develop words that bring us to a higher level of thinking. Like I
Hmm.
mentioned, the word strengths or success principles or set forward. We need to have a new symbol. If all of our symbols are tribal, they teach people to identify with just their tribe through their religious or whatever symbol. So we've got to create a new symbol. I've created what I call an asymptote. An asymptote is if given the assigned meaning, it's a line that goes starts 3.5 billion years ago and then slowly, gradually comes up to a turning point where we discover the scientific method, and then all of a sudden it becomes our intelligence is growing so rapidly now that it's getting out of hand. Well, this, if we understand this, we understand our history. So we've got to learn something about our who we are and what our purpose is. One of the things Neil Donald Walsh brought up, I mean, his emphasis is that we've got God all wrong. You know, if we have a God who, I mean, most religions say we want to teach the golden rule, but the golden rule is always their particular tribe. You know, there's this almighty being who's created everything in one day, 6,000 years ago, who gives us a set of rules, and he sends people to a very nasty place forever if you do the wrong thing. And if you just do what he tells you to do, which is praying and killing other people who are bad people, you know, it's okay to cut off people's heads and so on if you believe in this particular God. That these were the kind of ideas we've got to. It's not just challenging. We have to realize that we've been given this marvelous cerebral cortex that I call a genie organ. That if we teach it the right things, we educate it, it answers our prayers. It grants our wishes. You know the genie story. Genie, when we can free it from the lamp, when we can free it from instinct and tradition. So there are several things that we really need to do. We've got to get people together who are the advanced people. I personally believe I think you are in the best position in the world to do this, by the way, because I think you've already developed, uh, you have several things going for you that I know of anybody else has. You've developed the most successful principles because you've sold 500 million books that outdistances any. Some people must like your principles. They've had some results. We know that. You've been able to make contact with lots of other people. You have the influence to bring people together. It's not you alone, but you were probably the leader in the field. We've learned that our history is a little like a relay race. You know, somebody gets an idea and they run part of it, and they pass it on to the next person. So we had Abraham, and then we had Moses, and then we had Jesus, and we had other religious leaders, and then we had the people who brought us human rights. We've had Gandhi and Mother Teresa, and then we've had spiritual leaders. We've had people like Margaret, well, for example, Neil Donald Walsh, Barbara Marx Hubbard. Uh, I would say, and each has contributed something different. Our scientists have run part of the race, and they contributed something so that we're now becoming more knowledgeable and powerful. And then we have Jack Canfield. He's at the end of this growing list of we're a work in progress, you see. And there are people on the edge of the growing development, and if the success principles are at the edge. So I think you have basically some of the things that can pull off some of this because you have the influence. Think about it, if you got 500 million votes for your book, Al Gore got 51 million votes to become president, and he lost the election because somebody else, George Bush, who got 500,000 votes less, because of some quirk in our system that said if we arrange the votes differently, it doesn't matter that you got the most votes because we have another way of looking at it, so you will lose the election. But you see, the fact that you've gotten 500 million votes says you're a powerful person. I don't know if you realize how powerful you are. And we need somebody that can bring people together now, who can teach the principles that will work. And I think Einstein gave us the answer. We have to teach ourselves a newer way of thinking, and it's up to us to get the people that have power, that have influence, to work together. Does that make sense?
It does, and I would just say, to temper that a little bit and to also inspire others, that I believe that everybody is on the cutting edge of evolution of what's wanting to come into manifestation on Earth, peace being one of those things, but many other things as well. Newer forms of music, newer forms of architecture and art and cooking and whatever it is. And that each of us needs to step up and fully embrace that which we are attracted to do. You with peace, me with empowering people to live their highest vision, which includes peace. Michael Beckwith, who has a church called Agape, which is unconditional love and all that, doing his ministry and so forth. So whatever it is, I believe each of us is if we tune in, and you said if we tune in, see, I think part of the problem with religion has been that we've given away our power to intercessories, like whether it's the Pope or the priest or the shaman or the mullah or whatever, that says, okay, you tell me what to believe. Mm-hmm. When we all have the capacity to tune in through our intuition, through our heart, through prayer, through spiritual disciplines, to get our own messages for what we need to be doing to live a more fulfilling and harmonious life. I think that's the message that Neil Donald Walsh has been talking about with Conversations with God. My metaphor that I love, Don, is that there's this thing, we can call it God, universal intelligence. It's up there in the sky. We'll pretend it's the sun. And a whole bunch of people have been saying, hey, look, you need to look up at the sun. And then for centuries, we've been arguing about which hand is the right hand to point to the sun, different religions. But they're all pointing to the same thing, saying, hey, there's a higher power. There are these spiritual values and principles of compassion and love and forgiveness and all of that we have to live our life by. And so it's not about who's right and who's wrong, but all these higher qualities. We all have access to them. That's why we're all inspired by a Gandhi or a Mother Teresa or a Mandela or anyone like that. So I will do everything I can to bring forward what you're talking about. I encourage you to do the same. And all those of you out there listening to this interview, I encourage you to step up and do these things that Don's talking about, these 7 new word switches and these 2 self-love principles and techniques that you can do. And the thing I like about it, Don, too, you can put all that on one sheet of paper. Mm. All like there, it's doable, it's learnable, it can be something, and as you say, we can pass it on. And as one of my teachers once said, if I can learn that in 30 days and then pass it on to 2 other people who can learn it in 30 days, and then those 2 people pass it on to 2 people, it only takes 32 months for the whole world to reach that message. So each of us has to stand up and realize we can play our part in that ongoing geometric progression, which the scientists have taught us about, that is possible. So I appreciate you. I love what you're doing in the world. Tell people how to reach you, and we'll bring this to a close.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you taking your time to, as I say, I mean, you seem to be one of the very few people who's willing to listen. You're listening to me, and that's why I really appreciate it. Most people are not interested in listening. They're more interested in telling. So I spent most of my life creating my principles. I've had the wonderful opportunity to learn from thousands of patients and groups and so on. And like you've collected the wisdom and you're collecting your stories, I've collected what works for people in my work in psychiatry and try to put these together in some basic ideas. And I hope other people will use them. Everything I do is for public domain. I don't need any, I'm a very happy person, but my concern is my kids, my grandkids. I want them to have the benefit, and that's where my passion comes from. And you have that passion, I'm sure. Most people have that passion, but we've got to wake people up. So again, I thank you for the help that you've offered.
And if people want to reach you, they go to www.what?
Well, right now, they can go to www.lovingmenow.org. Lovingmenow.org. We're coming out soon with a very simple new website that will be called WorldPeace.Academy. WorldPeace.Academy. It's not quite available, but it will be soon. Everything that I do online is forever free, guaranteed forever free. And that's one of the reasons I hope anyone can come to it.
Great. Well, we'll get this up on YouTube. We'll put it on our Facebook page, and we'll encourage everyone that watches this to at least share it with 2 friends, and we'll get that progression started. And when we get WorldPeace.Academy, we'll let everyone know on our Facebook page as well. We now have over 1 million people as Facebook fans, so hopefully we'll get this information out there.
Please use some of these skills in your work, because I really think you are in the best position to be one of the next Nobel Peace Prize winners. And if there's any way I or other can help you, I think you're in the best position. Even you may not think so, but thank you again. And I'm going to sign off.
If I ever do win it, you'll be on the plane to me to Sweden, I promise.
Okay, I'll be looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.